All right, welcome to day 5, everybody. So we're going to pick up on page 32 and try to get a good read going on here. Last we met, we discovered that the family was interrupted in the middle of the night with some rapping or noise at their window. And naturally, the family felt that the mega mom had been to their home, and Aunt Gertrude was just beside herself. And so we begin now. By breakfast time, the news of the family's terrible nighttime visitor had spread all over Instep. Freda had hurried to tell a talkative neighbor or two, and any event to do with Kneeknock Rise, however mild or serious, was considered the rightful property of the entire village. And all that means, if anything happens with the megamom, everybody wants to know, and everybody owns that excitement or fear or panic, but it's all theirs. The morning air was chilly after the rain, and Aunt Gertrude, limp on a bench at the hearth beside a crackling fire, held court to a stream of eager visitors. To each, she described the thunder and the moans from the top of the rise. These they had all heard for themselves, but they listened anyway. It was her right, in view of what had happened, to speak for the entire night. So I'm going to pause here and just show you for the first time an image that's in this book. And you can tell from the picture and the clothing that this is set way back in time. Okay, it gives you a little bit more an idea visual to ground yourself with. And then as they leaned breathlessly toward her, she tried faintly but with emotion to describe what she had seen at the window. A kind of face it was, but very white, with a wild glow around it, and 2 eyes, I think, though there could have been 3. I don't recall a nose at all, but a mouth was just a big black hole. Oh, dreadful, dreadful. I can hardly bear to think about it. The visitors would cluck sympathetically and go away, some nervously and some rather jealously. Why do you think they could have been jealous? Because they wanted to be the ones to experience it. That's why. You got it. Egan heard one woman say to her friends as they left the house, "If Gertrude and Anson had only bought that weather vane I tried to sell them, it never would have happened. Everyone knows that an iron weathercock will crow at times like that and scare the danger away." "Nonsense," said one of the others. "A weather vane's no good. You have to grow poppies in your dooryard. No demon can stand the sight of poppies." "Poppies are all very well when they're blooming," said a third, "but the very best thing of all is still a bell. The devil himself will run when you ring a bell. It doesn't even have to be a very large bell." The same kind of discussion went on in the little house all morning, and when Uncle Anson came home from his shop at lunchtime, Aunt Gertrude began on it again. "For years, Anson, for years, mind you, we've been careful every night, the candle, the wishbone, the onions, and in spite of it all, this terrible thing happens." "See here now, Gertrude," said Uncle Anson, "the megamom, if it was the megamom, couldn't have seen the candle or the wishbone from that back window, and he couldn't have smelled the onions either." "But that's just it," cried Aunt Gertrude. "That's the very thing that makes us out so foolish. Don't you see? It never occurred to me before, but for all these years we've been assuming that if trouble came, it would politely round to the front of the house, wipe its feet even, and then knock on the door. The miller's wife pointed it out, of course, in front of everyone. I've never been so embarrassed, and they were right to laugh at us." Uncle Anson frowned. "See here, Gertrude," he said, "I don't believe for a minute that the megamom did calm down. He's got his place up there, and we have our place down here. I think it was just a stranger coming early to the fair who thought it would be funny to scare somebody." "Perhaps you're right, Anson. A stranger wanting to scare somebody. I'm sure I never heard of anything so mean. Yes, yes, you must be right. Well, Annabelle was some use after all, wasn't she? With her barking, that stranger won't come here again. Aunt Gertrude sighed with relief and gave Annabelle a large plate of pancakes she had fixed for lunch. The old dog beamed at the unexpected reward and lay about all afternoon licking her syrupy whiskers contentedly. Just before supper, Egan heard his aunt say to a late-coming villager, "Well, it may have been the megamum, it may not. We scared it away, though, and it won't come back soon again. Whatever it was, you may be sure of that." But later she said to Uncle Anson, "Just the same, I do believe that clock of yours with the feathers and all was bad luck, Anson. Let's have no more of those feathers in this house again, ever." "Perhaps you're right," said Uncle Anson. And that was a reference to the clock he had made that had Kneeknock Rise birds in it. So a cuckoo clock, right? Little bird comes out. And so it was claimed that he had copied or known of these birds that supposedly live up there with the megamum, because the megamum happens to like these birds. And so she feels that that's why the megamum came down to frighten them. Well, we don't know yet. We have to keep reading, right? Okay. So I'm on page 38, so follow along if you have your book with you. All right, and so here it goes. With nightfall coming on, they gathered close to one another before the fire. And this part I'm about to read is so quaint, so cozy, so loving. So I don't really care where you happen to live if you're watching and listening. Put yourself in this environment for just a little bit and become one of these characters, okay? With nightfall coming on, they gathered close to one another before the fire. There was a special coziness in being together now. After all the uproar of the night before, Uncle Anson smoked his pipe and dreamed into the flames, devising new and daring clocks, while Sweetheart, curled into a furry wad in Ada's lap, looked the very picture of innocence, a picture which from time to time he spoiled by stretching out a long forearm and arching the claws wickedly from a taut spread paw. Annabelle dozed on the hearth, snoring softly, and Egan poked at the fire with a stick, so nearly asleep that he jumped when Aunt Gertrude spoke to him. She was sitting on the bench sewing, and she held out for his inspection a curious pouch-shaped object of bright, soft cloth. "There, Egan, what do you think of that?" she asked. "It's the last of 40 sets. Egan looked at the object doubtfully. "It's pretty, Aunt Gertrude, but what is it?" he asked. Ada sighed. "You don't know anything, do you, Egan?" she accused. "Why, it's to go over the legs of a chair or a table, dear. Couldn't you tell?" said Aunt Gertrude, peering anxiously at her handiwork, "to keep the floor from getting scratched. 4 to a chair and 4 to a table, too. Of course, I've made them for years to sell at the fair. Marnomores, I call them. They sell very well, too. I'll send a set home with you for your mother." She tucked the bit of cloth into her sewing basket. "There, all finished. How about a story before bed, Anson?" Uncle Anson yawned. "Not tonight, Gertrude. Too tired. Have to get to bed early. After all, tomorrow is the fair. Lots to do at the shop." Out on the road in front of the house, someone in heavy boots came clumping along. Annabelle sat up, listened and with lifted ears, and hurried to the door, her tail thrashing expectantly. "No, Annabelle," said Uncle Anson gently. "That isn't aught." The footsteps faded away down the road. Annabelle's tail drooped. She turned away from the door and lay down again heavily, her brown eyes empty. "Poor old dog," murmured Uncle Anson. "Why did Uncle Ott go away anyhow?" asked Egan. "Ott is never happy in one place for long," said Uncle Anson. "He's a funny fellow in some ways, and then in some ways he's remarkable. Only thing he likes is reading and verses and travel. He'll be away for weeks, and then he'll get one of those wheezing spells of his, trouble with his breathing. So he comes back here and rests till he's better, and then he wanders off again. He's always took the dog along with him, though, but don't know why he left her this time. It isn't like him, and that's what worries us. The megremum ate him, crooned Ada. Hush, Ada, said her father roughly. That's nonsense. Ott wouldn't have climbed the rise. He has too much sense for that. No, he'll come back one of these days with all sorts of stories about where he has been. I just hope he doesn't stay away for too long. Annabelle's getting on. She won't be able to travel about much longer. How old is she? Asked Egan. Annabelle? Oh, well, I guess she must be 11 or thereabouts. 12, maybe? That's a lot of years for a dog. Uncle Anson stood up, stretched. Bedtime, everyone, he rumbled, and then he paused and turned shyly to Egan. By the way, nephew, would you like to see some of Ott's verses? They're not too bad, as a matter of fact. He took a small sheaf of papers from the mantelpiece and held them out. They're really, well, that is, they're not too bad. Even if he is my brother, look them over. I'd like to, said Egan truthfully. Certainly, that's all right. Go right ahead. And Uncle Anson, as if the whole idea had been Egan's the whole time, he beamed at his nephew suddenly, gave him the papers, and marched off to bed. So, what are your impressions? Who could it have been that came knocking on their window? And then the next night, the following evening, they heard clumping down the street. Could it have been the megremum? Who do you think it could have been? Do you also notice that Ada is making fun of Egan, even from the very beginning, like he doesn't know anything, like she keeps on poking fun at him, kind of teasing him. And Egan, I must say, I think he's really trying to hold his own and be respectful and asking for clarification and sort of just going along for this certainly adventurous ride and experience a very new space that he's not experienced before. And we also had talked about the issue of setting and how this was not a story that Natalie Babbitt placed in modern time, but rather pre-industrial time. And I'm sure that she did that for a reason, because if you can tell, there is a bit of superstition here. That isn't to say that people, even in today's society, aren't superstitious. Superstitions have been around for eons. People all over the world have their own ideas and thoughts about events and how best to explain them. And so being in, a rural kind of agricultural community such as this, with just one huge mountain that is ringed with blood-red mist when the sun sets behind, and then the sounds that are emitted from it when it rains, people will create stories to explain it. So far as we know, there is some kind of creature that lives up there. And we'll see where the story takes us next. So if you're following along with me, by all means, go ahead and sketch a picture of Annabelle, that's the dog, and Sweetheart, that's the cat, and maybe the other characters. Send them on, and maybe I'll display them sometime right here. All right, kids, that's it for today. Happy Monday.